Katie, start. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Please take your seats. I know there's lots of people we want to talk to. For those of you who are on the in-person seating, please do find your seat. In fact, I don't even know where my seat is supposed to be. Where am I supposed? When I come down, anywhere here. Good morning. We're going to start. My name is Rebecca Winthrop. I'm the director of the Center for Universal Education here at Brookings. I'm so pleased to welcome you all here in the room, but a special warm welcome to the close to 1,000 people who are watching online from around the world. We are really pleased you're tuning in. This is a really important topic. We are gathered today to talk about the intersections between building climate resilience and advancing environmental sustainability on one hand, and advancing quality and relevant education for all on the other hand. And these are definitely linked. This is the marriage of Sustainable Development Goal 4 and Sustainable Development Goal 13, and probably many other Sustainable Development Goals. On the one hand, the planetary crisis, which is the interlocking climate change and environmental degradation phenomena many countries are experiencing around the world, is holding back progress in education. It affects schools, it affects teachers, it affects students, it affects how ministries work, it affects how governments can actually serve their kids in accessing quality, relevant education. And on the other hand, the education crisis, the fact that many kids are out of school, many kids who are in school are not receiving a high quality education, and many kids are not learning the skills they need for today's world, including developing sustainable citizenship mindsets and developing green skills for the economy. That also, in turn, holds back progress on climate action. For us here at the Center for Universal Education, we were thrilled to co-host this event today because we focus a great deal on system transformation around the world. And what better way to really think deeply about how to make sure systems are transformed so they can be more equitable and relevant than really thinking at the intersections. So it's a big shout out and thank you to the Global Partnership for Education. I'm looking for Lauda. Lauda, thank you to you and your whole team, Surtaj and Julie and Sarah and many others, as well as our CUE team for co-organizing this event. About a week ago, the Global Partnership for Education launched a new framework. I really like it. I encourage you to go look at it. It is a framework to advance climate smart education systems. They received quite a bit of feedback from their network and ministries of education around the world that this is an area that needs more support and more work. And part of why I really enjoy reading this framework and think it's going to be helpful is it unifies a lot of the different silos and communities that have been talking about the intersection between climate change and education, from disaster risk reduction to green skills to climate literacy to infrastructure, et cetera. And we're going to hear all about it in a moment. And before we do, I want to say a special thank you to all our esteemed panelists, to ministers, government officials, honorable guests. We are very, very pleased to have you. And Brookings is a platform for advancing civil dialogue on important topics, sometimes hard topics, and we always like to be very transparent, so we want to make sure you know that the UAE and Denmark are donors to GPE, and one of our panelists today, and Didacus Jules is a board member of GPE, and that we at Brookings are committed to quality, independence, and impact in all of its work, and in our activities reflect that commitment. The views expressed today are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of the Brookings Institution, its Board of Trustees, or other employees. All to say, if you take issue with anything said today, don't blame my boss. So please do tweet at #ClimateSmartEducation. We've gotten a lot of questions already. You can continue to email them at events@brookings.edu. We're going to kick off with Laura Frigenti, the CEO of GPE, sharing their work and the framework, and then we're going to go through a series of fireside chats and presentations, and we will pause and take questions from the audience and from online as we do so, and I will introduce our panelists and speakers as we go. So Laura, over to you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And through Rebecca, I really want to thank Brookings for giving us the opportunity of launching this work that is so important to us in such a prestigious, organization. GPE, as you know, is kind of a unique organization in a sense that it's not a traditional donor. It's actually a partnership where so many different constituencies are. And I am particularly delighted to say that today here we have representations from all our constituencies. We have, as Rebecca said, our donors countries that are those that make it possible for our work to actually happen in practice. We have our partner countries that tell us how things should be done. We have civil society representations that keeps us on our toes, and all sorts of other players that all together contribute to the work that we are doing. This framework that we are launching today came as a result of, I would say, some very strong demands from our partner countries that were really, focusing on climate change and the need to actually mainstream, I would say, the awareness around climate change and good practices and good policies around climate change. And at the same time, we're thinking, what are the right instruments that can be used? And one of the things that, I have noticed having been working in global development for many years is that development is organized in silos. So you have environment, you have education, you have health, you have all your sectors. And one of the things that actually came immediately clear to us is that this was a great opportunity to bridge some of those silos, because education actually is, the education sector is a fantastic way for any message to reach so many different players and so many different actors. And this is why we thought about this framework. This framework does many things. As Rebecca said, is a simple, easy, user-friendly type of document that has the beauty of concentrating together lots of good practices, lots of good ideas, leaving each government the latitude of then adjusting it to the nature of the specific context of the country that they are managing and they're representing. And there are two things that I want in particular to stress. Schools are a fantastic way to pass messages onto a very large number of citizens. If you think about negative impact of climate change, the vast majority of the people think about, the big project, the big factory with the chimney and the black smoke coming out that needs to be reorganized. The reality is that there are many things that each and every one of us does in our daily life that have a very negative impact on the environment and on the natural resources that we are using in an improper way. Which instrument can allow you to reach so many students and actually make them the ambassador of, good practices, good use of resources better than the school? Thinks about the multiplier effect of passing a message that has been included in a curricula in school and making sure that these good practices are absorbed, are adopted by everybody in their day life. And I like to believe that these children then go back home and become the ambassadors of these practices with their family that maybe haven't had the opportunity of learning these things. And so you have a multiplying effect of good, a virtuous circle that through the classroom, through the education, spreads over to society. In many countries in which we are working, there are no other ways to reach as many people in one go as the education system and the network that it allows you to reach. So that, I think, is a very important aspect. But then yesterday when I was talking, I was actually doing an event at the World Bank with one of these fantastic youth leaders. And I said, why do you think that education and climate change have such a strong nexus? And she made me think, and she said, well, because we are the leaders of the future. We are going to be the policymakers of the future, the head of industry of the future, the decision makers of the future. And so if we learn very early in time what is a good approach to climate change and the use of natural resources, then that stays with us for a very long time, and we will not have to adapt and adjust. It will just be with us, genetically present in us. And that really made me think about that there is also this other aspect, that so many of the children that we educate in the school are going to be the future leaders. And so to make sure that they become the champion is something that is really going. She's here, actually, the person that gave me that idea. Thank you for being with us. Then there are all other aspects that are important, like the way in which the school are built, the way in which, for example, they allow a more economic use, for example, of water, of energies, of solar power, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many different ways in which education can be a conduit for good practices, and this is why we thought that it was really important to put together this framework to make sure that there was a consolidated place where all governments that wanted to use these ideas and then transform it and adjust to the context of their particular countries could find that. And we also like to believe that this is one area where we want to continue working with the partner countries. That is also, the other part of our work that I wanted to stress. Government are asking us, well, help us, for example, adjusting the curricula so that we can introduce, the right practice, and how should we do that? What is the right time? What is the right message, et cetera, et cetera. Help us train us, our teachers, so that they can pass the messages. Help us, understand what the right standards for constructions are. So this is a whole work that GPE is developing with partner countries that I see as really a growing line of work with a growing demand, and I am particularly happy that our organizations can help countries that are really trying to tackle very difficult challenges with something that is simple, that is ready to be used, and that I hope is going to be a significant and permanent impact on the environment. With that said, we pass the word to the next panel. Thank you.
Change and environmental degradation are the greatest threat facing my generation, jeopardizing our collective future and our human rights. This planetary crisis is also threatening education gains, as challenges faced by children and their teachers in lower-income countries are worsened by climate shocks and a deteriorating natural environment. Empowering girls and women with education saves lives and leads to more effective climate action, and quality learning for all children has a key role to play in supporting the transition to greener and fairer societies. We need to build climate-smart systems that can harness the power of education to build a resilient and sustainable future. Systems that can recognize the links between environmental action and education across these key areas. First, policy and planning. National plans and policies for education need to address environmental issues, and on the flip side, climate change strategies must consider the role of the education sector. Next up is data and evidence. We must collect, analyze, and most importantly, use data on the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on education. Coordination is also crucial. Ministries of education must be brought into national climate change decision-making and coordinating platforms to maximize the power of education to build greener societies. There can be no real change without investment and financing. We must mobilize equitable financing targeting the most vulnerable to invest in climate adaptation and sustainability in education. Infrastructure faces some of the most tangible impacts from climate change. We need to plan, design, and build safer and sustainable schools to have a minimal environmental footprint. Teaching and learning is another key entry point. Teachers and students must learn to become change agents and advocates who can engage with issues of climate change critically and constructively. Finally, we need to consider schools and communities. Schools are community hubs that can promote environmentally sustainable practices and draw community members into climate and environmental initiatives. There is no time to waste as we face an increasingly uncertain future and the urgent need to protect our planet. We must harness one of the most powerful forces of change that exists: a quality education for all.
All right. Welcome. We're really pleased to have two wonderful panelists. Dan Jorgensen, from the Minister of Development, Cooperation and Climate Policy from Denmark. Thank you for being here. Many thanks also to the Right Honorable David Senge, Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education in Sierra Leone. Unfortunately, the Minister of Education of South Sudan missed her flight because they misspelled her name and got stuck. But we're very pleased to have the Undersecretary of Education, Dr. Kyoko Abol, with us. So thank you for being here, Undersecretary. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. We're going to see if there's a question in the audience to field to you. I've got a bunch from the online audience. And Minister Senge, why don't we start with you? Sierra Leone is among the 10% of countries in the world that are most vulnerable to the adverse consequences of climate change. You are on the coast, it's beautiful, but sea level rise and I'm sure extreme weather keep you up at night. And you have talked a lot at numerous platforms globally about the importance of building a climate resilient world and how education can do that. Can you tell us why that's important to you, why it's a priority, but most especially, what are you doing about it? What actions are you taking?
Thank you very much. I think it's important that meetings like this, weeks like this, education is central to the conversations around financing, but also climate education in particular. I think we know that this is not theory. Our future depends on it. Our future depends on us being able to have resilient societies, that our kids are able to go to school throughout the year during the school period and not interrupted by climate crisis. We know that this requires action and urgent action and now, but most importantly that there are examples of action that are happening. And for us in Sierra Leone, as you said, it's critical for us because we have what we call radical inclusion. Everybody must go to school, irrespective of who they are. And our priority is to keep ensuring that things like climate do not ultimately inhibit access to education. And some of the things that we're doing vary from, maybe I'll categorize them local, national, and global. At the global level, GPE is so important to what we do. And as one of the country partners, we've been lucky to be on the board for the last couple of years, and we have been able to contribute to a lot of the strategic documents that come out of GPE. We hosted a foundational learning exchange in Sierra Leone recently with Ongai on the gender transformative leadership. And in each one of those, we speak about climate, because climate is central to what we do. On the national level, we have what we provide to schools. Apart from the fact that we have policy, we have the school infrastructure and catchment area policy. We have guidelines for building standards and ensuring that a lot of the principles that are within the climate smart documents are what is in our documents as well. and ensure that environmental and social management plans are in place for all new constructions of classrooms that we do. Recently, in collaboration with some of our partners, Fab Inc., we've been able to actually build quite brilliant AI models that can, based on data, we're able to predict flooding-prone areas. And this matters because when areas flood, teachers don't go and kids don't go to school. And it's important for us to allocate teachers and place schools and place schools in communities, noting where rivers are going to flood and where weather issues are going to be. And on our curriculum, we've been able to change and update all of the curriculum. Maybe a month ago, I was in the school to the grade level of class 1, primary 1. The government has been able to develop textbooks for environmental science and civics that these children are learning. So all throughout basic education, within our free quality school education, we've brought civics back into school, we've brought environmental studies back into school, and we've provided the textbooks and provided the teaching guides and teacher training. So it's important that the theory goes into the classroom and the kids have the content for it. And I'll end perhaps with two stories. One is, I think 2 weeks ago, I was on a trip with the president to the riverine areas in the south of Sierra Leone. You drive from Bo, the biggest city, 2 hours. You arrive and you hop onto a boat and you go on a boat for another 2 hours out really into a community where they'd never seen a minister, not to speak about the president, in their entire history. But we arrived there, and the president hopped off and went into this small town, village, a couple hundred people. And the only place where people could gather was in this school. And I had missed that particular stop because I was in another island. And he came back, and what he told me was there was a school that was there. It stops at class 4. And this school, great structure, but the environment, the roof was falling apart because of the weather situation. And his instruction was, please go and make sure that these guys have their renovation grant or that they're using their subsidies well. So it's that we go to the communities and see. And I'll end with another story. There's a friend called Jamie Barry. And I had seen what he does online, and he does this independently. He took climate and environment so importantly. He works in West Africa. He comes home, goes to Cambia, where he comes from, takes these tires and recycles them, works with the students, they paint the tires, they beautify it, put it into the school environment again, grow trees, and transforms the community from a place where you have all this plastic and tires being an eyesore to a beautiful, colorful, cheerful environment. And so at the global, national, and local level, there's action. And for me, that's the most important thing.
That's a great reminder that actually we can all do something, and teachers and community members have a lot of power to take action. Thank you for that, Minister Senge. Minister Jorgensen, you actually have a very interesting job because it's an integrated role in Denmark's government covering global climate policy and international development. And so the question we want to pose to you is, how can international aid better address the interconnections between climate and education? And I would wonder if you would want to speak a little about where gender equality fits into that nexus, because I know that's a great concern to your government.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that. Is the microphone working? Yes, okay. I recently gave a speech where, it didn't go very well. People didn't laugh at my jokes, and I thought
because they didn't hear you.
Well, I thought maybe they didn't hear me, so I asked, "Can you hear me in the back?" And then somebody in the back said, "Yes, we can hear you fine." But then somebody on the first row said, "I'd like to change seats then." Well, okay, sorry. So sorry for.
It's
sorry.
not. This is not going to be one of
This
these
is not
audiences.
gonna be,
We're gonna laugh at all your jokes.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is a serious matter, so I don't know how many we will have of those. But no, thank you so much for that, and thank you also for organizing this event. It is extremely important. So the reason why the Prime Minister decided to create a new portfolio in the Danish government that is responsible for both development collaboration, cooperation, and global climate policy, is that we think it's important that countries and the international community acknowledge that really most of the challenges that we face in development across the planet are today very tightly interlinked with climate change. So climate change is not something that might happen in the future. It's something that's already here now and that we know for certain will be worse in the future. Even if we succeed in doing more to fight it, it will still become worse than it is now. And this has some very, very extreme consequences that we need to deal with. Now, I'm sure that many of you work with education, probably all of you, every day, and you're probably used to arguing, well, there's not really any challenges in development policy that's not interconnected to the question of education, right? Well, I would definitely say the same thing about climate. So we have two subjects here, we have two themes which are at the core of development policy: climate change, education. And how are they then interconnected? Well, I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about a visit that I was on recently to Ethiopia, but I only have 30 seconds, so that's going to be short.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, great. So in Ethiopia, the Afar region, that's the hottest inhabited place on the planet. There they have now another failed rainy season, so it doesn't rain, not even the few weeks where it's supposed to rain. This means that even the camels are dying from thirst. What happens in a family of herds when the camels die? Obviously, the poverty, the social consequences are enormous. And what we see is that one of the first things that happens to poor families when they're hit by drought, poverty, what it might be, is that the kids stop going to school. This is just an example from Ethiopia. I could give you many from all over the world of how, when climate change hits, it affects the ability of families to prioritize their kids going to school. So that's just one very, very concrete example. And that, is, of course, starts a vicious circle, right? Because as many of you have eloquently spoken about today, we need children to be educated in order for them to also be a part of the solution to climate change. So if they don't go to school because of climate change and they're not able to fight climate change and adapt to climate change because they don't go to school, it just shows you what an evil circle we might end up in. So this is basically the reason why we need to work closer together to solve these problems.
And what would you say you're doing differently in Denmark because of that insight?
Well, I would say first and foremost, we are focusing a lot on not only mitigation. Now, most of the meetings that I go to all over the world, I speak about mitigation because Denmark is known for our energy transition and deployment of renewable energy. All of that is important for us to fight climate change. But what people forget very often is that, as I said earlier, climate change is already here, so we need adaptation. Plus, it's easier, even though it's hard enough, it's easier to mobilize financing for a big wind turbine project that will generate some revenue than it is to help the Afar region to adapt to droughts, because there's no money in that. That's basically drawing on the willingness of governments and institutions to, for idealistic reasons, help. So we need more governments and institutions to realize that if we don't start allocating more money for climate adaptation and resilience right now, the consequences will be catastrophic. Sorry.
Great. Thank you. That's super helpful. I'm going to have one question from the online audience to close out our panel before we let you go. This is a question that's come in from someone at the Malala Fund, and I'd like you each to answer it in your own way. So it's a question about global financing aid architecture for the intersection of climate and education. And Minister Senge, I'd like to ask you if you had one thing that you would like to say to the donors of the world and the people who are working on reforming the global aid architecture and, well, actually the global finance architecture to ensure that it's fit to respond to climate emergencies, what would it be? And then Minister Jorgensen, what is your assessment of the impact that this reform on the global finance architecture is going to have? So, Minister Senge.
I was smiling because it's this afternoon. We have a lunch that focuses specifically on climate financing architecture, and to which I think those who are going to be, I encourage you to come with ideas, and hopefully we'll all have a better answer for the person who's asked. But I think the one important thing to mention is that the world is moving forward. We are aware that the current aid architecture and global financing architecture, particularly for education, needs to be transformed. Countries and the world have said we need to transform education. The thought leaders have said that. They've given commitments to transforming education. We cannot transform education within the same systems of delivery that existed. We are where we are because those systems themselves did not get us the results we needed. And unfortunately, you cannot do everything without money. There are certain things you can do. My team has what we call the Zero Leones Challenge, where we have to solve problems with no money. But largely, we need money. And so the important thing for the donors and for the people who have money, by the way, Denmark is a good ally to Sierra Leone through the Lego Fund. Lego Foundation is supporting a lot of what we do. And the reason why I cite them in this example is because they practice what everybody should practice. They put the country's priority first. And when I engage with partners, actually, this morning I sent an email. I was patient because I received an email from somebody, an organization, international organization, for which I recommended my deputy CEO, a female, amazing person who we've invested in, to attend this meeting. I recommended her. And this person replied to say to me, "Dear Minister, we're just looking for your confirmation to approve this other person who's somebody junior to go." And I told them in an email, "I'm sorry, are you telling me that you know what's better for me to do in my organization for," but I was kind in my response to them.
I think it's a good message.
Yes, I think the takeaway is the countries know what they want to do. We have our people's interests at heart. We have plans. We have directions. You should work with the countries to ensure that we can deliver and reach the most people.
Thank you, Minister. Final word.
Well, I definitely agree on that point. I mean, even though climate change is a global challenge, actually, when you look at it, most of the solutions will be local if they are to work. Now, I think the most easy answer to your question is that governments around the world need to do more. So Denmark is one of the few countries that allocates 0.7% of our gross national income every year to development aid. I wish more countries would do that. But even if all developed countries did that, we still wouldn't be where we need to be. So it's the first step, also because government aid you can spend and use more directly also in projects that are not necessarily good business, but that you need to do anyway. Having said that, though, it's I think the main focus of the discussions this week in the World Bank is how do we manage to use governments and institutions like the World Bank and other MDBs to leverage more private funding? Because let me give you just one example, and then I'll stop. But in the climate negotiations, the COP process, already back in 2009, it was promised that we would mobilize from 2020 to 2025 $100 billion a year. We, meaning the developed world, for climate finance. And that still hasn't happened. We need trillions, but we cannot even raise 100 billion. That just shows you, first of all, governments are not stepping up, but also we are far from where we need to be in mobilizing private finance.
That is a wonderful call to action. I thank you both, and I'm going to invite up a youth speaker. So thank you both so much for being with us. Yes, a round of applause. It's a great call to action, and who better to talk about moving forward than our next speaker, Tamalde Salimi, who is the founder and director of Eco Champions, which is the largest African network of young people leading climate action through education. So, Tamalde, welcome to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Temilade Salami, and I'm a GPU leader from Nigeria and the founder of Eco Champions, a youth-led organization that works at the intersection of climate change and education. This is Lagos, and over the past few years, Lagos has experienced an increase in flooding, especially in waterlogged areas. Rainfall levels in the city have greatly increased due to climate change and sea level rise. Last year, over 24,000 households were affected by excessive flooding in Lagos, Nigeria. And I have lived in this city for the most part of my life and also studied here, so it's really personal. During the heavy flooding last year, school buildings were damaged, classrooms were inaccessible, and children were unable to attend classes or even have access to quality education. This picture is a picture of a school called Community Primary School, and the school is a victim of yearly flooding, and that leads to regular closures. The students and teachers would always have to walk through this bridge in order to access their classrooms. And when the flood becomes unbearable, the teachers and students have to stay at home. Climate change and access to quality education are closely intertwined, and as we can see from the flooding incident, this reality continues to fuel my passion to advocate to take action on climate change and education in Nigeria and in Africa. And this is why I'm playing my part through Eco Champions in Nigeria, an organization I founded 6 years ago while I was in school. And through our two programs, first the Climate Change in Classrooms and also the Climate Education Leaders Fellowship. We have taught thousands of students in different schools about climate change and have produced contextualized materials on climate change. And this is one of the books that I wrote. As you can see, it's illustrated in black characters just to give more context in the schools. And we use this book to teach in primary schools and secondary schools in Nigeria. And this is one of our fellows. His name is Don. And this is him just trying to host a roundtable discussion in his university. And he's one of our climate leaders fellows from Kenya. And Don brought together his classmates to discuss climate change and how they can also go to communities to effect change for the teachers and also the students. My experience with Eco Champions has really illustrated that the impact of climate change is really severe on education, from floods in Nigeria to Cyclone Freddy in Malawi and droughts in East Africa. In the midst of all of this, it is very important to note that girls are often the most affected. For example, they have to walk long distance to fetch water for their families, and this also reduces their participation in schools. Recently, Cyclone Freddy, a powerful and deadly storm, as we can see from this picture, this is a school. It severely impacted several countries, including Malawi, where weeks later, 500,000 children were unable to attend schools as buildings have been damaged and remaining buildings are being used as shelters for displaced people. Through my work with students and young people, we see the impact of education on resilience and climate change and mitigation. For example, at Eco Champions, we have been able to reach thousands of students in schools and young champions across Africa. So far, we have trained 70 young people across 26 African countries to take the lead on climate change education. And I can only imagine what would happen if investments in climate education and teachers was scaled up so that every girl and boy receive quality education that includes climate education. This will not only empower young people like me to take action, it will also accelerate the green transition. So I ask today the ministers and every guest seated right here that climate change education is very important to drive the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamaldi. She brought up a lot of issues around teaching and learning. In particular, I'd like to invite my next panelists, who I'll introduce as they come up. Didacus Jules, Director General of the Organization for Eastern Caribbean States, please join us. And Gwen Hines, the CEO of Save the Children UK, please join us on the stage. We are moving now. We've gone from policy planning and financing, and we're moving into students, teachers, and communities, and thinking about shifting learning practices to support climate-smart education systems. And Tamaldi, thank you for that. That was powerful. That was strong. I wish we could broadcast you around the globe. Didacus, I'd like to start with you. You ready? Yeah. Got your stuff? Okay. Your region, the Caribbean, is particularly vulnerable to changes from a warming planet. You've got extreme weather, you have hotter temperatures, rise in sea level. We heard a little bit of that from the Minister of Education from Sierra Leone. And you have said before in numerous places that education is about shaping an ecological consciousness as an existential imperative to our era. A very eloquent and powerful phrase. We would love to hear how you are taking action on that insight. What are you doing to sort of transform teaching and learning in the Caribbean and better prepare students?
Okay, I would first of all like to put that statement in context because sorry, I suffer from spring allergies. The reference to ecological consciousness is more than just environment. It is really about having a more universal mindset about the purpose of education at this historical moment. Because in the Caribbean, we are not just faced with challenges of the traditional challenges of climate change, as in sea level rise and hurricanes and so on, but we also have what I describe as a concatenation of crises affecting us. So just in the last year, for example, while COVID was raging across the region, we also had in St. Vincent and the Grenadines 32 volcanic eruptions happening, which resulted in not just the shutdown of the economy, but the relocation of half of the island to the south. And while half of the island was relocated to the south, we were faced with torrential flooding in the south. So, you know, this thing is a series of crises that keep coming at us. And in the context of education, not only has it affected education from the point of view of the disruption of learning, but it poses key challenges to what is the purpose of education. How do we refine education so that it becomes a new tool for rebuilding civilization, given all the problems faced by humanity? In that context, we are talking about a transformation of education that takes into account a more holistic approach. I've often railed against the tendency, certainly in the Caribbean, for us to create new subjects as plasters for every sore. So, for example, you know, if there's a problem of crime, people talk about, well, why don't we do crime as a, you know, take crime into the curriculum? A classic case has been a long-ranging argument that I had as former registrar of the Caribbean Examinations Council, where several governments were calling on me, we must introduce a subject called critical thinking. And I'm like, well, critical thinking is not really a subject because mathematics properly taught is critical thinking. Learning a foreign language is critical thinking in a linguistic sense. English literature is critical thinking. So the challenge there, if I transpose that argument to the sphere of climate change, while I agree that we must address climate change issues in education, we have to look also at ways in which, first of all, define what is the purpose of education, as I said, and then look at what are the core things that we need to do in education. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let us look at a redefinition of some of the core subjects define those core subjects. So in every subject, there are opportunities for introduction of critical thinking, as in problem solving, linking those problems not to abstract academic problems, but to problems facing communities in society. In the Caribbean Examinations Council, for example, there's something called school-based assessment. And the school-based assessment can be done by an individual student or by a group of students, which encourages group work, collaboration, as well as competition. The subject matter of these SBAs could be the application of knowledge in the particular subject area to real-life situations and problems. Looking at how we can embed issues of climate change, not just in a scientific understanding of climate change, but importantly, the action that needs to be taken by students to begin to make the changes at home, in their communities, and within the country as a whole. So an opportunity for education to be a generator of new ideas, innovations, community-based action, as well as stimulate the knowledge base and the awareness about education. And by the way, whatever we do in schools automatically reaches into the homes. Because if students are fired up with the need for example, food security, and they do school gardens at home, they do home gardens.
Great, thank you. Gwen, I'd like you to build on that a little bit and talk about just picking up on what Didika said about the importance of schools at the center of their communities. Kids come back, it's not a, one hopes that it isn't, an impervious wall between the school door and the rest of the community. And really hear from you what the role of communities themselves can be and how they can work together to support schools, monitor progress, drive systems to become more climate smart. And I know that you have a lot of examples from community engagement, given SAVE's work, trying to do that. So we'd love to hear some.
Sure. Well, we could all talk for many hours, I know, and I could give you hundreds of examples, but I won't. But I'll really try and build on what Didika and many others have said today. And two pet hates I want to put on the table today. One is silo working. So it's lovely that we're talking about how climate and development come together. In all the debate this week about funding, it gets into, well, do we fund climate change? Do we fund development? Of course, we need to do both. They're very, very linked. There are trade-offs. We need to look at that over the time horizon. But fundamentally, these things are linked. And as others said, climate crisis is something happening now. And we need to think about those things. My second pet hate is that we're going backwards. I've been in international development for 25 years. First 20 years, great. We all talk about the progress being made. Oh, it's great. We halve child mortality. We make all this progress. Pre-COVID, we all talked about how far off track we were for the 2030 SDGs. This year, we have the midterm review. In the last couple of years, we've gone further backwards, and it's shocking. And we still have so far to go. We cannot afford to keep going backwards. So I was saying earlier, one of my really big issues at the moment is how do we do much better at shock-proofing progress? When I lived in Malawi and I ran the UK aid program there, I used to sit with the finance minister. He needed 27,000 new classrooms. Well, if we're losing them because Cyclone Freddy, if we're losing them because other things happen, how on earth do we keep up with that? Never mind the kids. When I was in Uganda last year, schools have been shut for 2 years. The loss for those kids is massive. So coming back to your point at what do we do about it, something we've been working on, and just given one example is the Philippines, where we've been working with the government, working with the Prudence Foundation, who work in insurance, so love this kind of thing, on a comprehensive schools safety framework. And what I like is it's not just for climate risks, it's all hazards. In fact, it was actually designed for different kinds of hazards. So when we work all over the world, the disruption can be conflict. The disruption can be an earthquake. The disruption can be floods, it can be famine, it can be COVID, it can be anything. We need these comprehensive frameworks that bring all those different things together. And what I really like about the work we did, again, as Minister Senge said, it was led by the government, by the Minister of Education in the Philippines. We came in behind with global experience ideas, but it was really designed to apply at the community level. And we saw during COVID, including in the UK where I live, the community level is where things happen. You can have the most sophisticated systems in the world, but if they don't work at that community level, they're not going to work. That is your point of bigger risk or biggest opportunity. And we've gone beyond that and brought kids in. My husband's a teacher. I have teenage boys, and I can tell you now, my husband's pet hate is people say, oh, school should be doing this. What you need is to actually design it, and you need to design it around the way teachers and schools and communities work and the way kids work. Because kids are the ones who can tell you, well, you think that's a really smart idea, but that doesn't really work in reality, or I've got a better idea. And so how you have those comprehensive frameworks, and we're keen now that we adapt that kind of mechanism around the world. We were just talking about how do we take the lessons that we've all got, how do we do this as a public good? And just one final thing to say is, something else we're working on, and I think leads from that, and I think for all of us is, what is the day one contingency plan for education in crisis? I'm a humanitarian by training. We pre-position food, we pre-position supplies. How do we pre-position that education restarts on day one in a crisis so we don't have all these losses? Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. There's a question from the audience that I want to pose to both of you, and then I want to see if there's any questions in the room that you would like to ask. So just raise your hand and we'll have a microphone come to you. So we have a question online from the Association for Progressive African Educationalists. And the question is, do you think that the framework, GPE's framework on climate smart education systems can be taken up and used by communities? And I would love to hear your thoughts. Didicus?
Yeah, I'm just looking at
Do you even, I would quiz you on the framework?
Yeah, I thought you would come with that trick. I'm looking at the framework. It covers policy and planning, finance, physical infrastructure and facilities, partnership and coordination, curriculum, teaching and learning, data and evidence, and school community linkages. I mean, that is a pretty comprehensive framework. And one can come with different models, but the 7 elements of that framework pretty much covers everything. And I believe it can be applied not just at the level of the state or the nation, but also at a community level. So one then has to find creative ways of ensuring that these different elements are touched on. So for example, in terms of physical infrastructure and facilities, as we heard earlier today, a lot can be done by communities in maintaining their schools and helping to upgrade the schools, even if it is ultimately the responsibility of the state. But communities taking charge and assuming responsibility for these facilities is a very important step in claiming ownership and having a bigger say in the governance of schools. So at every level, in the Caribbean, we have designed, and I was chair of the working group at the Caribbean level, looking at a redefinition of the new Caribbean school, and that preceded COVID. So the whole idea was to come up with a model like that, that touch on all the elements, and you can see from what I'm going to describe, the convergence of that model with the GPE model. We spoke about first determining the school outcomes, the purpose, the why of education, but we looked at resourcing, infrastructure, culture of schools, processes, human capacity, curriculum. And undergirding that were quality indicators of access, equity, quality, and relevance. Right? So using these models, I think, is a good way to maintain and keep in focus a holistic and integrated approach to education transformation, regardless of which level one is operating at. And it provides the opportunity for the synergy between the actors. I heard talk earlier with Minister Senge about silos. The sad reality, and I was having a long discussion with my colleague before the meeting started, and we're talking about the work that they are doing in their space. It's admirable the way in which they try to break the silos and bring convergence. But the reality is that even within silos, there are silos within silos. So we face, I'm telling you, as coming from a Caribbean country, it's horrific what is happening with some of the in the donor space. Agencies are competing with each other. They are separating agendas. Everybody wants to plant their flag on every initiative. In some cases, they come with oxymoronic solutions. I mean, one example was one agency coming up with the idea of something called child-friendly schools. And then they provided funding. They provide, and
an agency not to be named.
Not to be named, frankly, but it's a well-known agency. And they were actually providing grant funding for schools, and there was a template to assess the degree of child friendliness of a school. And I'm like, what the hell is this? A school, by its definition, should be child friendly. So I agree with the need to ensure that schools are child friendly, but you don't create a category, an apartheid of child friendly and non-child friendly schools. If a school is non-child friendly, it should be closed.
So, Gwen, before I come to you on this question from about applying the framework to communities, I have a follow-up question for you, and I want to see, is there anybody who has a question from the audience? We have a young person here. We have two people. So we'll take both of you, but if you could be very brief.
Sure. Yeah. I did want to just thank everyone here for putting this all together. So thank you. And I guess just one question I have is, given there's so many critical parts of the work everyone here is doing, I do have one question, though, that does concern me. I agree that, educating about better climate practices is one really crucial part of a broader solution. And I don't ask this question because I think one thing should be done instead of another. But, if we can agree that, incorporating smarter, more responsible climate practices is something we should all be doing, then would you have a message to people who just objectively, by the numbers, are contributing much greater to climate change, which is a universalized issue, right? Even holding up a mirror to what we do in the U.S. And wealthy nations that are just objectively, and not only people, and this applies to me too, I know for a fact that I am contributing way, way more on a personal level to climate change.
That's a good question.
It's a universalized issue. So what message would you send to people in wealthy nations, to corporations that are driving this issue, if we can all agree that, we should be teaching these better practices?
Thank you.
Sorry, I know I'm rambling, but anyway.
No, you're not. It's a great question.
Thank you for your work. Seriously, I just want to stress that.
It's a great question, and it's a little bit of self-reflection in a speak truth to power way. So what would be your message? I live in the U.S. I'm sure my carbon footprint is much larger than people in your part of the world. So I want to take the second question, and then you can both respond. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Joyce Adolo, and I'm actually with Save the Children. And it's about the point that you raised, Rebecca, about the utility of the framework at the community level and the engagement of private partners and by private public institutions, because we know we can't deal with it if the oil producers like in Nigeria are not part of the solution. So, just putting it out there, I don't know what your thoughts are about that, because that's something that I felt was not addressed.
Thank you. So, Gwen, framework at the community level, and can you wrap in public-private partnerships? And I think it's a good challenge. Like, what's our message to the people who produce a lot of the harm when it comes to climate?
So many issues in there, and fantastic and absolutely defer to Joyce, and I think so just to try and wrap those issues up. Firstly, absolutely, we need to mitigate the climate crisis, because if we're not doing that, we're just walking into such a big issue. But what's also coming through here, I think, is that, even if with the best wind in the world we get to 1.5 degrees, we still have a lot of problems baked in. And today we are seeing the Horn of Africa, Pakistan, elsewhere where things are already being hit. And my point is it's also all those other things which are happening. And we know, you just project forward, conflict, climate, more pandemics, all these things end up overlapping. And just have a picture in your mind. Something we did last year was we interviewed nearly 55,000 children around the world, 41 countries. Biggest ever survey we'd done. And what was fascinating to me is people often think of kids as passive. We have to help sort your future. I mean, we've all seen they're busy campaigning on these things. But what was interesting to me is they see the climate crisis and inequality as absolutely linked. And they see it as basically grown-ups, you've ruined the world. So either get out of the way or fix it. And we also mapped there's about 800 million kids where poverty and vulnerability and risk to climate issues is very, very overlapped. So I guess what I'm saying is all these links, they're incredibly overlapped, and we need to absolutely do our bit now, and that includes helping people today who have done nothing to create this crisis and who are suffering the worst effects, as well as trying to make the problem smaller. And that absolutely has to be grounded in community reality. So you look at what is the number one issue for you today? Because talking about what happens in 5, 10, 20 years when people are actually struggling with this today, kids' education cannot wait. That's the whole point. It's in the title of the organization. GP, ECW, it's all working together. If my kids lost 2 years of education, I stress about that. And yet we look at the rest of the world and we think, oh yeah, we'll get to that sometime down the line. We can't do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Didicus, I'd like to give you the last word.
Yeah, I can just say ditto to what my colleague said, but really the youth are the army of the future. And that's why the importance of the school in that whole process, the intersection of climate change issues in the school, so that they can begin to shape solutions, begin to think about the issues. It's true that there's a disproportionate contribution to the effects of climate change between the developed countries and the underdeveloped or developing countries. However, that does not absolve us from the developing countries from our own responsibilities. Because on a proportionate level, it's one thing to talk about recycling, and sometimes we engage in actions that feel good, but really don't have an ultimate impact on the problem. So in the Caribbean, a lot of effort is put now into plastic recycling because after every flood, the extent of plastic waste is obvious, coming down with the rivers and so on. However, is the solution just recycling of plastic? If we continue to import plastic stuff in plastic containers, it requires a resolute political will to say no more importation of anything involving plastic. Or if that plastic is brought in, it has to be the type of plastic that can be recycled in a meaningful way. So there, I think one has to be very strategic in the approach to this question, but definitely there's definitely a divide between older people in the world today and youth, because, I'm really heartened by the work being done by my colleagues' organization, because listening to those voices is very critical. Doing the surveys, being able to map what 1 million kids are saying and thinking, and importantly, feeling about these issues will help us determine how best we can support them in their ambition to lose their fear, to take decisive action, and to shape the future that they want to see.
Thank you both so much. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome to the stage our next speaker. Didicus set him up beautifully as Youth Are Our Future. Manoj Bhardwaj, who's the founding advisor of Nurture Nature Global from India. And welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Excellency, honorable ministers, members of the civil society, academia. Thanks to GP and Brookings for giving me this opportunity. My name is Manoj Bhardwaj. I'm from India and also pursuing my PhD in international climate policy here at American University in Washington, DC. So first few slides about our work in India. So we are Nurture Nature Global. We partner and spread climate awareness through education. We started in 2016 as an event, just like with a simple cause to create awareness around climate change and its adverse impacts. So we did a lot of activities, and it was started in Chandigarh, in the northern part of the country, with the name Nurture Nature, Be the Change, Bring the Change. So we did seminars, competitions, street plays, cycle rallies, sapling plantation drives, and many more activities to make the people aware. The impact was like we covered around 20 cities across the country, and it was like a lot of people participated, mostly young people and also elder people. So we literally spread the education around climate change. And then there are a lot of activities we have done over the years. So this is what we are doing, obviously involving school children and young people. Now, how the climate crisis impacts education. We have been hearing from all the learned speakers that climate crisis is an education crisis. So I have given this chart that there are direct effects and then there are indirect effects. So as you can see, there is destruction of education infrastructure, degrading of learning environment, stress on WASH infrastructure, and then ultimately it increased vulnerability of education systems. And when we talk about data, the education of more than 40 million children is being disrupted, and it has been quoted by the UK government in one of the studies. Now, as we all know, that climate events destroy schools and other critical infrastructure, and which prevents children from getting formal education. So here is an overview like how For example, heavy precipitation results in drop in school attendance and poor performance school dropouts, which obviously leads to a decline in educational attainment. And then obviously poverty and climate change disproportionately impacts the poorest, deepening existing inequities, as our speakers from the Save the Children UK said. So what are the main events, climate events that really affect, prevent students or children to get into the schools? These are droughts and water stress, floods and severe storms, and severe heat stress. So now we see what's the climate change impact on education infrastructure in India. So if we see the climate events, there are like two types of events, like fast natural hazards and slow natural hazards. Fast are like flood, cyclones, which directly, quickly impact the education infrastructure. And then we have droughts and environmental degradation, which over the period results in decline in the number of children going to the school. And then again, according to the UNICEF study in India, and overall 80% of Indian youth responded that education has been disrupted through climate change. So it's documented, it's backed by evidence and data, so we cannot deny it. There's a picture of one of the drawing that has been made by children at a school in Bihar region in India, where she shows that like there is extreme heat, there's no water, drought, so which prevents children to go to the schools and remain at home so that they can be a bit healthy and don't get sick while they're at school. Then poor infrastructure already adds to the impact of climate change. We see this, this is a picture from, I think, Bihar again, at a GCC middle school, which is government school, which is a makeshift classroom under an asbestos roof, which is not like good enough for extreme heat temperatures and also like extreme weathers like rain and floods. And then again, you can see in one more picture that the infrastructure is really poor. So already there's poor infrastructure, which is not supporting the current education system. But adding on to that, if climate change, climate events affect that, it's a really bad impact in schools. Schools get, I would say, destroyed. So some facts and numbers. Again, Bihar is one of the states that get affected a lot in terms of school education. In 2008, around 1429 primary schools and 105 secondary schools were fully damaged. Then again, in 2017, 1522 school buildings were damaged. In Kerala, in 2018, 1613 schools being affected by the floods. And on Odisha, around 5,735 elementary and secondary schools were reported. So India is already a very big country, so we need investment and support on a very large scale to support all these schools and education systems and infrastructure. One of the problems in India that there is lack of awareness. So one of the parents in one of the surveys by PW said that it's a God will and we cannot do everything. So there is a lack of awareness and knowledge and education that people think it's just a God will, it's not a man-made thing. But climate change is a man-made thing. So what can help is education and knowledge. Education obviously increases the adaptive capacity, and then knowledge also helps to mitigate and tackle it. Now, role of education in enhancing the use of climate resilience infrastructure. It plays a very important role in local level adaptation, help young people to understand the impact of climate change and to fight it. And obviously it motivates them, what we are doing around in India through our organization. And then what schools and educational institutions can already do to strengthen resilience around climate change is capacity building, partnership, nature-based solution, and intergenerational dialogue, which is very important. Then again, the direct and indirect effect of quality education, which improved resilience and capacity to climate risk. This is one of the schools that we have supported in Punjab in India. In terms of infrastructure, we helped gather funding, and we got a very good infrastructure in this school with all the ACs involved and to tackle with floods and other climate change impacts. And as in the beginning, Rebecca, you said it's the marriage of goal 4 and goal 13 of SDGs. So I used it. So I mean, education infrastructure obviously deserves very great attention and adaptation policy. Education investment is more urgent. I cannot repeat more. Focus on climate education is immediate. And parallel, robust online education, e-learning infrastructure is also the need, because in terms of a disaster, after a disaster, it takes a time to build the physical infrastructure, but online infrastructure can go online quickly. And rural and indigenous people require special attention. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you so much, Manoj. You set us up beautifully on all the themes we're about to talk about in the next panel. So I invite the next panelists to please come up and join us here. I am very, very happy to be joined. I'll introduce them as they come, Minister. Very happy to be having with us Mr. Mikko Alikainen, who is running the Adaptation Fund. Really important, all that we learned about the real-life impacts on infrastructure from climate change education. And then also very, very pleased, and thank you for being here and taking time, the Honorable Dr. Ahmed Balou Ali Falassi, who's the Minister of Education of the UAE. So I would like to start with you, Mikko. You have a big organization that is focused on lots of what we just talked about in all of the sessions, but we'd really like to hear from you now is, to get quite practical. How can we construct infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of climate change? And can you give us some examples of the work you're doing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca, and really great to be here. Thank you to GPE and the Brookings Institution for organizing this important event. The climate change has huge impacts on all kinds of infrastructure, including education infrastructure. It's really critical that we ensure that schools are safe and healthy places for students to learn, and that they factor sustainability and climate resilience in their design. It is an area that has not been paid adequate attention to. I represent the Adaptation Fund. We've been funding adaptation projects for 15 years. We have about 150 concrete projects around the world, totaling more than $1 billion. And less than 10 have had significant education components in them so far. There's also very little on the education in the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which shows that it seems to be an area where we really need to focus more going forward. And that's, I really commend the work of GPE on the CSES framework. I've seen it, and it's really impressive, and it provides a good basis to build on. To ensure that infrastructure is resilient, of course, it's important to have regulatory frameworks for infrastructure that are up to date and that those are followed. And the following up part is also quite crucial. Quality of construction, use of materials, and also something that is not always remembered is that we are not only looking at the quality with the current standards. Climate change is getting worse, and we need to plan school buildings so that they will also withstand the future climate. And in 20 years, climate impacts are quite different than they were a few years ago. Climate change is here already with us, as we know, and it's getting worse. Rare events are becoming more common, and this affects the impacts. They are getting stronger, and also the locations. We are seeing climate impacts in places where we didn't see severe impacts before. School safety protocols are really important, but I'm really happy that already today, many times the participation of the broader community has been mentioned. Community buy-in is really crucial in all adaptation projects. So consultations with stakeholders need to be done in a way that support the infrastructure, and equity is an important part in that. So we cannot provide adaptation only for some and forget about others. And it's often the most vulnerable that get forgotten, unfortunately. So, for example, poorer area aspects in that. I'm happy that Temilade mentioned the girls' schools and situation. We need to make sure that the girls' schools are not given any less attention compared to boys' schools in terms of climate resilience. Within the Adaptation Fund, one of our most prominent school resilience projects is in Haiti. and it's called Implementing Measures for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction, national partners, and just under $10 million in value. Its objective is to enhance the adaptive capacity and resilience of the Haitian entire education sector to climate risk, is to establish a risk assessment tool and to provide, most of the investment goes to school retrofitting. They've had quite significant earthquakes, 2 major earthquakes in the last 15 years, to improve the schools so that they're more resilient, providing training to staff and students, and putting in place risk management protocols for school system. And also it includes activities that address the entire community. It's a highly relevant project that addresses urgent adaptation needs, and especially since it takes place in the wake of these massive earthquakes that have affected schools as well, and dozens of thousands of children there in Haiti. It's a new project, but we are very encouraged by it and some of the others that UNESCO and others are developing. It's clearly a way of the future, and we are looking forward to funding more education action.
Thank you. Miko, I want to follow up on exactly that. You are speaking to largely a global audience here in this room, but also a lot of people online listening. I mean, largely an education audience. Hundreds of people across many countries are tuning in, largely from education. And when you said the adaptation fund, really only 10% of the funding has gone to really greening school infrastructure, education infrastructure. What do we as an education community need to do differently to get more of that money?
Well, the short answer is that you need to be heard, you need to be visible in the context of, there's a huge funding gap for education, as we know. I think UNESCO put the price tag somewhere around $40 billion per year in developing countries. For adaptation, is more than $100 billion per year in developing countries. So there's a lack of money, as the Minister Jørgensen from Denmark mentioned as well. So we need to make sure that funding goes where it's needed. And synergies are really an important point here. I'd like to mention that in the project in Haiti, these schools that are retrofitted, they double as climate shelters during storms. And by doing this kind of multi-purpose facilities, you can cover some of the adaptation needs while you're covering the education needs. And there are many even larger projects around the world that are doing just that, including in Bangladesh, a massive project that uses schools as shelters. So when the countries formulate their national adaptation plans and their implementation of those national adaptation plans that essentially guide what they are planning to do in the area of adaptation, ministries of education need to be included. It's always, of course, up to the countries on how they, in the end, decide to go about it. But so far, there has been a gap there, and I would really encourage the education community as a whole to step up.
Thank you very much, Mikos. Okay, you heard it here. We have to get our ministers at the adaptation planning, and we need to pitch schools as multi-purpose adaptation centers. Thank you. That's very practical and very useful. Minister, I would like to turn to you. There have been, the UAE has lots of, we heard about the Haiti example from Miko, but you have been doing lots of work in the UAE about greening schools, and you have a variety of programs and initiatives. Could you please share with us your experiences, your lessons learned, and what steps your government plans to take to ensure school infrastructure is more sustainable?
Look, I think we live in a very harsh environment. The heat is harsh, water is scarce, so it's very hard to do it in a very sustainable way, but the UAE has taken this very seriously. Maybe we should start first with the learnings and the outcomes that we have learned from these various initiatives. If one thing we've learned that no matter what initiatives you do, no matter how much you gold-plate your curriculum or your activities, it all boils down to the teacher. And within the UAE, we have about 75% of provisioning of education is through private providers. A lot of the teachers in the UAE are actually coming from other countries with different backgrounds. So it's extremely difficult to have a consistent agenda on sustainability when you have teachers at the forefront coming from different backgrounds with different level of awareness. Unlike other countries where the majority are public school and majority are citizens, it's sometimes a bit easier to do that. So that's one complexity we found. So we really dialed down on teacher training to ensure that all teachers are able and capable of expressing and really involving students when it comes to sustainability and awareness about climate change overall. Secondly, we double down as well on extracurricular activities. As Benjamin Franklin once said, tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I may remember, but involve me and I will learn. So we've noticed that once you get kids involved at a very young age, it really goes a very long way. So that's one thing I think what we have found out was do not spend too much time on developing the content itself, focus on the teachers and focus on the activities. If I go back just quickly, we've been lucky enough to host ARENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. First thing we did was to sign an agreement with them at the Ministry of Education to develop the curriculum and the teaching framework for teachers to be able to do that. That has really trickled down across different jurisdictions where every single emirate and every single entity took that down and they dialed down. We focus on waste management, we focus on greening schools, we focused on teaching students the concept of sustainability. So I think that really went a long way for us. We have about, I can go through the list, but I don't want to bore you with all the details. We have 1,400 schools. We've already covered approximately 400, so that's about 30%. Our goal by end of year is to reach at least 50% of schools to be greened. When I say greened, I mean at least one principal and one teacher to be fully immersed and fully aware of the project we are doing with the different entities. Yeah.
Wonderful. I wanted to pose this question to you that came from an online audience, and I have a partial answer, but I'd be interested in your answer too. And then we can go to the audience. So please think of your question and raise your hand, and the microphones can come to you. This is from Community Resources for Science. And the participant who's listening online asked, are people making their climate education resources for teaching and learning? You talked a lot about teachers publicly available. Is any of sort of your lessons learned, are you sharing it in the region? Are you, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So I think we're also hosting COP28, and our goal is to create a legacy. We intend to share all of our resources that we've developed with UNESCO, with other entities, to be available in Arabic and in English for countries globally. So all the resources, whether they're curriculum, material, or even broadly knowledge, we're planning to keep this as a legacy to be developed during COP28, but also dispersed at least in English and Arabic for the surrounding region. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I want to give a shout out. We were talking about it right before the panel, to a new initiative called Teachers for the Planet that has come out of last year's UN General Assembly meeting around transforming education. It's come out of this initiative called 17 Rooms that looks at each of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's run by the Learning Planet, and it is focused on curating, so I'm sure you're part of that, curating teaching resources on climate education around the globe that anybody can access. So speaking of COP, can you tell us, we're excited to hear, can you tell us about the plans to center education at COP? Because education has not been central to COP for most of the convening. So this is an exciting moment.
Absolutely. So I think, to be fair, it was included, but not fully. So it was under youth overall, but there wasn't a specific vertical on education. This will be the first. As I said before, it really boils down to the education and the students. You are really educating them for the future. So I've been blessed to be the CEO of Masdar, which is a renewable energy company. I've been on the board for the past 7 years. Over there, we're working on the supply side, so supplying of solar power, wind power, renewable energy. But at the end of the day, you need to also work on the demand side. So no matter how much clean energy you produce, you need to work on the way that people can behave to reduce their carbon footprint. So on COP28, a big focus on education. As I said before, we'll be developing the framework with the UNESCO and other entities. We're working on greening the schools, and that has 4 pillars. So first of all, the physical space. I cannot teach students about sustainability when their school is not as sustainable. So we want to get the kids involved with the teachers to make the school's footprint as small as possible. So that's one thing. Secondly, the learning, whether it's extracurricular or curriculum, that's also being developed. Secondly, the capacities of the teachers themselves to really offer a training manual for all teachers around sustainability. And fourthly, equally important, the community around the school. Because schools are dispersed in all geographical locations. If you're able to activate the school, not only to be as a beacon of knowledge for the student, but also for the wider community, that will really go a long way. So these are the 4 pillars that we're working on with our partners. And again, coming out of that, we want to make the resources available for everyone in Arabic and in English.
Wonderful, thank you. Questions from the audience? Tamalde has a question. And one question over here, yeah. We'll take them both together and then have a final response.
Good morning, Your Excellency, and really amazing seeing you again. I know UAE is hosting COP28, and we also saw that there has been increased interest for youth to attend. And one of the things I always say whenever I attend COP is how are we engaging young people, beyond talking and also like giving speeches. And you talked about, a framework for education for COP28. And I know that Rewired is also a specific and strategic partner. So my question to you is, how are you engaging us from the start of the process for the framework? The normal thing we're used to is the framework is ready, and then they get a youth to come on board, like a fireside chat, and then we launch the framework. But how is COP28 and UAE ensuring that young people like me are very much involved right from the beginning so that we can bring a fresh perspective and also contextualize solutions? Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on, we're going to take another question. Yes, please.
Mine is actually very similar to that. We've heard a lot from policymakers and people today who control where funding goes with education. And many people have said that the communities are very important. However, with the top-down approach, we're seeing a standardization of materials and things being given to schools to follow these specific practices. So what are concrete things that you are doing to leave room for communities and their decisions and values within those spaces?
Great, and I'm going to add, so there's a theme. You're going to close on this theme. So we have basically engagement of people in the system, students, teachers, communities. I'm going to add, because there's another question from our online audience from Earth Force, which says, you all are decision makers, you lead international organizations, you lead a ministry. What do young people, students, have to do? It's very similar to Tamalde's. What should they do differently so you would listen to them more? So all a similar theme. Miko, why don't you start, and then the minister will close.
Thank you. Yes, the emergence of the youth environmental movement, the climate movement during the last almost 10 years, at least more than 5 years now, but it's been really impressive, and we see it in our work. Obviously, as it started as the Fridays for Future movement, but now it's spread around the world. And has really energized young people as a resource and as a constituency, because we're talking about the future, and the young people have the biggest stake in the future compared to us older people, So in adaptation fund projects, we've really tried to engage as much as possible with young people. It's not easy always. There aren't always structures to do that, but through consultations, as we try and consult comprehensively with other segments of society, gender groups, and different ethnic groups, and so on. We also involve youth, and in some projects, more than others, we've been able to really actively have a role for young people. For example, we're funding a project in Armenia that is developing an app for high school students that will help them see impacts of climate change in their immediate environment. And we just need, we also have realized that we need to find the appropriate tools that we can use to reach youth. When we're talking about young people, I would also like to mention the importance of civil society. There's an overlap, if I may, in a way that young people are working, representing the civil society, and that's really crucial for us at the level of each project, but also at the level of the fund, to make sure that what we are doing is being checked, and young people are a tremendous resource in that respect as well.
Thank you. It's true that it's, I've always found it a little painful that the Fridays of the Future movement had to leave school to advocate for climate action. It's quite telling. So tell us your final remarks, Minister.
Well, I think when it comes to involvement of youth, as I said before, it'll be the first COP with a specific vertical on education. We will have an education pavilion as well. We're working with the FEE, the Foundation for Environmental Education, which also gathers input from different parts of the world, different schools, and also from different policymakers and different teachers. So we hope that it'll be an iterative process. There's no finished curriculum issues. It's always an evolution. That's one part. But the point that was made was very good about how prescriptive should you be and how much room should you leave. I think we all know that the quality of an education system is a function of the lowest performing teacher. For us, we came to education a bit late, so the quality of the teachers in the UAE is not at par to other geographies. And therefore, you would have to at least prescribe a bit more than you would. You would have to tell them what are the main pillars. As you have stronger teachers into the system, as you improve your education, it's always good to give more leeway to them. We're doing that transition right now by rewarding better performing teachers with more autonomy. There's a certain level of autonomy that we give, but then you want to make sure that if that teacher is supposed to teach sustainability, he or she would not only double down on environmental, but also balance it with social and financial as well. It's a balance, right? So you need to make sure that they have the right framework, and then you can always leave room. And again, the context differs from Dubai to Lagos to, as we in the Caribbean. So there's always a level of autonomy based on the context of the environment, and there's a level of autonomy for the teacher by the virtue of being a teacher and being closer and allowing them to give their own perspective as well. Thank you.
All right, well, we are at time. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for all of you for staying with us and participating.